night walk in the Black Forest. So, there's this story about a guy who went hiking in Germany's Black Forest, Schwarzwald, in German. If you don't know it, picture miles of thick pine and spruce trees, the kind of woods where the canopy is so dense that even during the day, the light feels heavy, greenish, like you're walking underwater. It's the same forest tied to a lot of old fairy tales. The creepy ones where kids wander off the path and don't come back. That's the setting. This guy, let's just say he was a tourist, someone who thought it'd be cool to take a night walk through the forest. And to be fair, it's not unheard of. Some locals even offer guided tours after dark. But he wasn't with a guide, just wandering with a flashlight, probably feeling adventurous. At first, it was quiet. The kind of quiet where your ears start filling in with your own heartbeat. And then he noticed something. The sound of footsteps. Not far away, not echoing, right behind him. You know how your own steps make a rhythm? Crunch, 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 on the dirt or gravel? What he heard wasn't just random forest noise. It matched his pace. If he slowed down, the steps slowed. If he sped up, they sped up. It was like someone was walking just a few feet behind him, copying him exactly. He stopped and spun around, flashlight swinging into the trees. Nobody. Just trunks, branches, a whole lot of black. His light caught mist here and there, and the trees made those shifting shadows that played tricks on your eyes. He told himself it was probably his imagination. That happens in the woods. You start hearing your own movement echo back, or maybe there's an animal pacing you. Deer do that sometimes, staying just out of sight. So he kept walking. But the steps started again. Crunch, crunch, perfectly in sync. This time when he turned around, he didn't just see empty trees. Way back in the dark, just at the edge of where the flashlight beam ended, there was something. Not an animal, not some random hiker. It looked like him. His own outline. Standing there, stock still between the trees. Same height, same shape, almost like looking at a mirror. He froze, and so did it. No movement. Just two figures staring at each other across the shadows. He thought about calling out, but his throat locked up. Then, for no clear reason, he decided the smartest move was to just keep walking and not check again. He picked up the pace and didn't stop until he was back near the road, breathing hard, flashlight beam bouncing like crazy. The next morning he met up with a local guide, someone who'd been taking tourists through those trails for years. He mentioned the weird footsteps, half joking, trying not to sound like a total idiot. The guide didn't laugh. Instead he asked, "Where exactly did you walk?" The tourist showed him the path. The guide went quiet for a second, then said, "That explains it. I walked that same stretch early this morning, and I noticed something strange." "What?" the tourist asked. "There were two sets of tracks," the guide said, "side by side. Like you weren't walking alone. If you're American and never been, it helps to know that the Black Forest has this reputation. It's beautiful during the day. People go for cake, spas, cuckoo clocks, all that touristy stuff. But at night, it has this weight to it. Locals talk about doubles, shadows that copy you, sometimes even showing up in photographs. Kind of like the stories of fetches in Irish folklore, but rooted in German woods instead of green fields. Whether you buy that or not, one thing's clear. When you're alone out there in the dark, and you hear steps falling in line with yours, you'll start to wonder if you really are alone. And if you stop and look back, just hope you don't see yourself looking back too. The Whisper in the Bunker. There's this story I heard about a group of students in Berlin. They were history nerds, the kind of people who actually get excited about old architecture tours, underground tunnels, that sort of thing. Berlin has a ton of that. Remnants of the Second World War still sitting under the city. Some of those bunkers and tunnels are sealed off, but others you can still access if you know where to look. This group decided one weekend to check out an abandoned air raid shelter. These were the bunkers built during the bombings, where civilians used to cram together underground while sirens blared above. Imagine concrete walls thick enough to mute explosions, narrow corridors, and no windows. Just stale, damp air. Most Americans haven't seen anything like that in person. The closest comparison might be a fallout shelter from the Cold War, except these are older, rougher, and tied to some of the darkest parts of European history. They went in with a couple of cheap flashlights, laughing at first, the way students do when they're trying to make an adventure out of something half illegal. The air hit them right away. Cold, damp, carrying that mineral smell of old concrete that never sees sunlight. Their voices echoed in weird ways, bouncing back from walls that twisted into dead ends. At first, it was just fun. They pointed at rusted doors, graffiti from the 80s, even a couple of discarded beer bottles. Proof that they weren't the first to sneak in. They joked about ghosts, about soldiers still standing guard, about how if you turned off the lights, you could still hear bombs falling. Typical dumb student banter. Then, in the middle of one long corridor, something strange happened. It was faint, like static at first. One of them thought it was feedback from his phone speaker, but then they all heard it, this soft crackle, like a radio being tuned through stations. And then came a voice. Not clear, but sharp enough that they all caught the word. Alarm. Over and over. Alarm. Alarm. It wasn't someone shouting in the present. It had that metallic, clipped sound of old wartime broadcasts. Anyone who's ever heard recordings of air raid sirens or announcements from that era knows the tone. It's distant, but urgent, meant to be obeyed. They froze, listening. The bunker's walls seemed to carry the sound, like it wasn't coming from one spot, but from everywhere at once. One of the students whispered, "It's probably someone outside messing with a speaker." But deep down, none of them believed it. They were too far underground, surrounded by solid concrete. No phone signal, no electricity, no speakers. The whispers of alarm kept coming. Steady, mechanical, as if from another time. They panicked. As much as they wanted to look brave, instinct kicked in. Get out. They turned back toward the way they'd come, their flashlights shaking as they hurried. The passageways felt longer now, narrower, like the air was pressing in. That's when they saw the shadows. Up ahead, near the bunker's exit, figures stood in formation. Not random people, figures in long coats, stiff postures, shapes that looked like soldiers in old uniforms. No detail, just silhouettes, but lined up perfectly, as if waiting for orders. The students slowed, fear choking them. Nobody wanted to say what they were seeing, but they all felt it. Then one guy, the one in the back, swung his flashlight forward. The beam cut through the dark, shaking across concrete and dust until it lit up the line of figures. For a split second, they could swear the shadows had faces. Hard, pale, belonging to another era. And then they noticed something worse. One of their own friends was standing in that line. He hadn't screamed, hadn't run. He was just there, shoulder to shoulder, with the soldiers, staring blankly ahead, like he belonged with them. The others shouted his name, waving their lights frantically, but he didn't move. His face looked flat, drained, as though he wasn't even recognizing them anymore. And then, just as quickly as the radio whispers had started, everything went silent. No static, no voices. The shadows seemed to melt back into the walls. Their friend blinked, staggered, and looked around like he'd just woken up from a dream. He swore he hadn't moved. Swore he never left the group. But the rest of them had seen him standing there, in formation with soldiers who shouldn't exist anymore. Later, when they told the story, people rolled their eyes. Bunker hysteria, some said. Old concrete messes with your senses. Maybe. Berliners have a phrase for that, bunker flimmern, like bunker fever. The way the silence and darkness can scramble your brain. But here's the part that stuck with them. When they left, they noticed their friends' shoes were covered in a fine gray dust none of the others had on them. It looked like the powder from untouched corners of the bunker floor, where nobody had stepped in decades. The others had no idea how he could have gotten there without breaking formation, and he had no memory of leaving their side. To this day, he swears he was never in that line, but the rest of them remember the beam of the flashlight catching his face among the soldiers, and the voice echoing through the dark, repeating a word that still makes their stomachs twist whenever they hear it. Alarm. The Castle Feast. So there's this couple traveling through Germany, following the Rhine River. If you don't know, the Rhine isn't just a river. It's this long, winding stretch lined with medieval castles. Some are restored and turned into hotels or museums. Others are just crumbling ruins perched on cliffs. You can drive along, hop from town to town, and almost every bend in the river has some fortress on a hill watching over it. It's beautiful, but also eerie, especially at night. This couple decided to check out one of the ruins that wasn't part of the tourist trail. Not the polished, ticketed ones, but one of those half-forgotten castles that just sit there, broken towers and shattered walls covered in ivy. No lights, no gates, just stone left to the weather for centuries. They climbed up the path as the sun was going down, carrying a cheap flashlight and their phones. At the top, the castle looked almost like a skeleton. Arches open to the sky, floors long gone, windows staring blankly over the river. During the day, it might have seemed romantic. At night, with the wind rushing through cracks and the last light bleeding away, it felt different. They were about to turn back when the woman stopped. She pointed at a tall, arched window. "Look," she whispered. Inside the ruined hall, where there should have been nothing but stone and weeds, there was light. A warm glow, flickering like candlelight. The man leaned closer, and his breath caught. Through the window, they saw a banquet. Long tables stretched across the hall, draped with white cloth. Golden candelabras lined the center, each flame swaying gently, as if in a draught. The tables were piled high with food, roasted meats, fruit spilling from silver bowls, glasses filled with wine that gleamed red in the candlelight. And people were there, dozens of them. Men in fine coats, women in gowns, all seated, laughing, talking, raising their glasses. The hall that had been a ruin from the outside was alive inside, as though time had folded back a few hundred years. The couple pressed close to the glassless window, staring. They could hear faint sounds too, the clink of silverware, low voices, the soft ripple of laughter. The woman whispered, "We should go in." The man shook his head. "It's impossible. We were just there. It's empty." But the longer they watched, the more it pulled at them. Curiosity won. They circled around, found an old archway where the wooden door had long rotted away, and stepped inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, everything changed. The light vanished. The laughter cut off. The hall was black, except for the weak beam of their flashlight. The stone walls looked just as ruined as before, jagged and collapsed in places, with moss growing in cracks. No tables, no food, no people. Just dust and silence. The woman's voice trembled. "But we saw it." They swept the flashlight across the hall. The beam jittered on rough walls, empty space, and then landed on the center of the room. There was a table, or what was left of one, just a slab of stone or maybe rotted wood, hard to tell in the dark. And on top of it, in neat rows, were bones. White, brittle bones lined up where plates and goblets should have been. A long row of skulls stared blankly, each one set where a face had once laughed and toasted. The man dropped the flashlight for a second, his hands shaking. The beam rolled, making the skulls seem to grin as shadows shifted across their faces. The couple didn't wait to look closer. They stumbled back, nearly tripping over rubble, until they burst out into the night air. When they told the story later, friends tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a reenactment, someone said. Germany has those festivals. True, but those are loud, obvious, with costumes and vendors, not secret candlelit feasts in ruined castles. Others suggested maybe their eyes played tricks, light from the town below bouncing up through broken windows. But no trick of light explains the bones. And if you've ever walked through the Rhine Valley, you know the stories. Every castle has one. Some tragic count, some betrayed bride, some curse that lingers. Locals shrug at it like it's part of the landscape. For the couple, though, it was no legend. They still remember the warmth of the candlelight on their faces, the sound of voices that should not have been there, and they remember the silence inside, broken only by the sight of white bones arranged like guests who never left the table. The factory shadows. There's a story about a guy in his 20s into urban exploration, what people call urbex. Basically, sneaking into abandoned places to take photos. You see that a lot in Europe because there are so many old structures. Castles, hospitals, train stations. In Germany, especially near Munich, there are factories left over from before the war. Huge complexes of brick and steel, long since shut down, left to rot. This guy decided one afternoon to check out one of those sites. The factory sat outside the city, overgrown with weeds, its windows long smashed out. The walls were blackened, stained from decades of smoke, and the roof sagged in places where the weather had beaten it down. No tours, no fences, just a forgotten building. He went in with his camera. Not a phone, but a real camera, old school DSLR. He wanted those moody shots you see online. Shafts of light cutting through dusty windows, rusted machinery sitting like fossils, graffiti layered on the walls. At first, it was exactly that. Empty rooms, cracked tiles, broken staircases. The kind of place where your footsteps echo, and you wonder if the floor will hold. But then he noticed something in his shots. The first photo looked normal. A hallway lined with rusted doors, light slanting across the floor. The second photo, there was something in the corner. A figure. A man in dark work clothes, almost blending into the shadows. He wasn't there when the shutter clicked, at least not that the photographer remembered. He laughed it off. Dust, shadows, maybe his own reflection in broken glass. Easy mistake. But with each photo he took, another figure appeared. They weren't clear at first. Just shapes, blurred faces, men in heavy overalls like factory workers from another time. Some stood by doors, others leaned against machinery. None of them moved in real life, only in the frozen images. The photographer's nerves started to fray. He kept snapping anyway, as if the camera might prove him wrong. But every click added another shadow. By the 10th shot, there were half a dozen men in the background, standing closer. Clearer, their faces streaked with soot, their hands rough, eyes flat and hollow. And then came the last photo. He had set the camera on a timer to take a self-portrait, something to prove he'd been there. He stood in the center of the room, framed by broken windows and a rusted beam. The shutter blinked. When he checked the screen, his stomach dropped. There were men everywhere, a crowd of them, filling the room, standing shoulder to shoulder in work uniforms that looked decades out of place. Their eyes were on him, every single one. And on his shoulder, plain as day, was a hand. Blackened with soot, fingers thick, resting heavy. He hadn't felt it when the photo was taken. But there it was. He bolted, camera clutched tight, stumbling back out into daylight. The whole way home, he didn't dare look at the photos again. Later, when he loaded them onto his laptop, he saw everything clearly. The first empty hallway, the growing crowd of men, and the final shot with that hand pressing down like a weight. He tried to delete it. Selected the file, hit delete, emptied the trash. Gone. But when he opened the folder again, it was back. He tried again. Delete, remove, overwrite. He even renamed the folder, reformatted the card. Still, that one photo returned. Always the same. Him in the ruined factory, surrounded by workers who shouldn't exist anymore. One hand gripping his shoulder like it belonged there. People he showed it to had theories. Glitch in the memory card. Photoshop prank. Pareidolia, you're just seeing shapes. But none of those explain why the image kept coming back, even after wiping every drive he owned. None explain why only that single picture refused to vanish, no matter what he did. And the worst part? Every time he opens it now, the photo looks just a little different. Sometimes there are more men in the background. Sometimes the hand on his shoulder looks tighter, the fingers curled deeper into his jacket. And sometimes, in the reflection of a broken window behind him, he swears he sees his own face. Not looking at the camera, but turned, staring back at the man whose hand rests on him. The Song in the Harbor. Hamburg is a port city in northern Germany, and if you've ever been, you know it's got this mix of heavy industry and nightlife. Giant container ships, cranes lining the docks, and then just a few streets over, you've got bars, old taverns, places where sailors still drink the way they did 100 years ago. It's gritty, noisy, and alive. But late at night, when the fog rolls in from the Elbe River, the whole harbor feels like another world. That's where this story takes place. One night, a sailor had been drinking in one of the dockside bars. Nothing fancy, just a smoky little place that smelled of beer and salt water, the kind of joint where you can still hear sea shanties on the jukebox. He stumbled out after midnight, a bottle still in hand, the harbor lights blurred by the haze. It was quiet, except for the groan of ships shifting in the current and the creak of wooden pilings. The fog was so thick, it seemed to swallow sound. And then he heard it. A voice. A woman's voice. Singing. Not loud, not like a performance. Soft, almost like a lullaby, drifting through the mist. He couldn't make out the words, just the melody. Slow and haunting, curling out over the water. At first, he thought it was coming from one of the ships. Maybe a crewman playing a recording, or someone singing to themselves. But as he walked along the pier, the sound didn't fade. It followed, growing clearer, tugging at him. He felt himself drawn toward the end of the pier, where the fog thickened and the dark water lapped against the wood. Through the haze, he saw her. At first, just a shape. Then clearer. A figure, standing on the surface of the water. A woman, long hair spilling down her shoulders, body swaying with the rhythm of the song. She wasn't moving toward him, wasn't waving, just standing, singing, her voice wrapping around him like a net. Every step he took felt less like his choice and more like compulsion. The alcohol in his blood made it worse. His thoughts blurred, but the song was sharp, cutting through everything else. He reached the very edge of the pier, leaning forward, staring down at her reflection rippling in the black water. And then, Just like that, the singing stopped. The silence hit him like a slap. No voice, no melody, just the sucking sound of water against wood. Before he could react, something cold pressed against his back. Not the air, not the fog. A hand. It shoved hard. He stumbled forward, his foot slipping on the wet wood, arms flailing. He expected to crash into the river, to sink into that dark current. But when he blinked, he was on the pier, flat on his stomach, gasping for air. Alone. No one behind him. No figure in the water. Just silence. He staggered to his feet, shaking, scanning the fog for any sign of her. Nothing. But then he looked down. Across the wooden boards of the pier were wet footprints, small bare feet, leading away from where he'd fallen. They trailed across the pier, vanishing into the fog. But they didn't go inland. They led only in one direction, back toward the edge, back into the black water. Later, when he told the story, some laughed it off. Too much to drink. You fell and imagined it. Others said it sounded like the old sailor legends. Stories of women in the water whose songs pulled men to their deaths. Americans would probably compare it to mermaid tales. But in Northern Europe, they called them by other names. Spirits tied to rivers and seas, always hungry for company. The sailor swore what he saw was real. He still remembers the melody, soft and sweet, echoing in his skull whenever he's near the harbor at night. And he still wakes sometimes with a sensation of cold fingers pressed between his shoulder blades, pushing him toward the dark